Joining us today for our webinar, Kashmir's Continuing Ordeal, a year after August 5, 2019. I want to begin by thanking all the speakers. Thank you, Dr. Asad Majid Saab, for joining us from.
Now I can hear you, sorry.
We have a very distinguished panel of speakers. They will be speaking on various facets or various aspects of this has very tragically unfolded since the revocation of Article 370 last year. I'm very grateful for the presence of Ambassador Salman Bashir, former Foreign Secretary to India. Thank you, sir. We also have Mr. Ijaz Haider. He's a leading voice on Kashmir. He's an editor of Indus News. Mr. Muzammil Thakur, who has joined us from London and was President World Kashmir Freedom Movement. Mr. Todd Shea, who is CEO and founder CDRS, and Dr. Asif Rahman, Chair Kashmir Humanitarian Task Force from New York. Thank you all. Let me also very quickly point out that we are live streaming on Facebook and Twitter, watched and followed by a large number of people. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been suffering under inhuman lockdown and military siege for a year, following India's illegal and unilateral action of August 5, 2019. India's actions aimed at illegally altering the demographic structure of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions and also of the international law. It is very unfortunate that while the world is grappling with the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, India is busy unabashedly with RSS BJP-fied extremist Hindutva ideology. Let me also point out that it is very ironic and cruel beyond belief that on 5th August 2020, just 2 days from now, after 1 year of the completion of the siege of Kashmir, India will actually be staging the Ram Mandir ceremony, which is a celebration, in fact, of the twin acts of the destruction of Babri Masjid and siege of Kashmir. India must be asked to stop its atrocities and must be held accountable for the egregious violations of the rights and freedoms of the Kashmiri people and its minority populations. Before I request Ambassador Salman Bashir for his remarks, I also want to express my gratitude for the large number of messages of support that we have received from several organizations and individuals, US congressmen and elected officials for the Kashmiri people. I particularly want to thank Mr. Jamal Bowman, Democratic nominee for New York Congress District C, who has called out the human rights violation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and tweeted his message in this context. I want to play this message for you, and let's all hear what he has to say.
Love everyone. It's Jamal Bowman here. I hope everyone out there is being as safe as they possibly can as we continue to deal with this coronavirus pandemic. Human rights violations that are happening to the Kashmiri people. It's unacceptable, and it's something we need to call out and fight against wherever it happens in the world. And human rights violations, children suffering here in the 16th District of New York, and children suffering and people suffering all over the world. It's time for the United States to be a humanitarian leader, and I myself will continue to fight for the human rights of the Kashmiri people and people all over the world. Right now, because of a government blockade, they're dealing with lack of phone access, lack of internet access, and so many other rights that are being stripped away. So I stand with you, people of Kashmir. I will continue to stand with you and fight for you. And I encourage the entire world to come together to fight against human rights violations. Thank you so much. Peace and love, everyone.
Very solid message of support. And now I request Ambassador Salman Bashir for his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Asha, I hope you can hear me. I had to my cell phone because I think the other thing is not working. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Consul General, for asking me to participate in this webinar on Kashmir. I commend your efforts to draw attention of the world to the sufferings of the Kashmiri people, who for over a year have been held in captivity and subjected to the worst kinds of oppression by 1 million Indian troops. I truly hope that this webinar will contribute to creating awareness and to stirring the conscience of the kind-hearted people of the United States to speak up against tyranny, and uphold freedom and liberty for the oppressed Kashmiris. America has been an icon of freedom, of human rights, of democracy, and a pathfinder for realizing the vision of common humanity. America must assert its moral authority and hold India to account for its policies and practices in Kashmir that are akin to genocide.
We can hear a lot of echo. If
Yeah, just give me a second if I can fix this thing. Is that better?
much better, sir. And sir, if I could request you to kindly go over the last couple of lines.
Yeah. I was saying that America has been an icon of freedom, of human rights, of democracy, and a pathfinder for realizing the vision of common humanity. America must assert its moral authority and hold India to account for its policies and practices in Kashmir that are akin to genocide. To Americans, Kashmir, that is some 9,000 miles away, may seem distant or just a dot on the map. Beautifully ensconced between Pakistan, China, and India, Kashmir is often referred to as the Switzerland of Asia. It is home to some 9 million peace-loving people that are steeped in spirituality and a humanist culture. The Kashmiris are well known for their artistic skills, weaving out of wool exquisite tapestries and tending peacefully to their fruits and gardens. For over a millennium, Kashmiris assimilated the best of values and traditions offered by their civilizational sojourns through the crossroads of Eurasia. In humility, in harmony, in tranquility, they presented a fascinating example of coexistence. Mountains and valleys, flush with gushing torrents and placid water lakes and abundant apple forests. The Kashmiri way of life was disrupted in 1947 with the landing of Indian forces in Srinagar. Since then, they have been afflicted by brutal realities of intrigues, cruel politics, coercion, and colonial occupation. Kashmir became a contested space, a theater for hegemony and conflict. In the world of the United Nations, Kashmiris rested their case in higher values of humanity, belief in the sanctity of international law, and confidence in the promise of the United Nations for justice. The UN Security Council upheld their inalienable right to self-determination to be exercised by plebiscite in 1948. The United States supported the Kashmiris and recognized the principles underlying their just cause. Even today, the US Congress, many US senators and congressmen have spoken out for the cause of justice in Kashmir. President Trump offered mediation on the Kashmir dispute. Pakistan had welcomed the president's offer. India, however, has opted to the use of force to quell the Kashmiri aspirations for freedom. It decided last year to double down on its repressive measures. On 5 August, it dispensed with the notional fig leaf of occupation by purported dissolution of the state of Jammu and Kashmir by its illegal actions in declaring Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh as union territories to be ruled by fiat from New Delhi. This was done by the force of arms, without consulting the Kashmiris, by incarcerating all Kashmiri leaders, inducting additional 100,000 troops, and giving them a license to torment and tyrannize the Kashmiris into submission in a futile attempt at acquiescing them to Indian rule. India's colonial conduct in Kashmir rings with a clear message, that is, show no mercy. 9 million Kashmiris have been in captivity with their homes and hearts being systematically violated day in and day out for the past 1 year. The sordid tales of Indian atrocities are well documented by the UN and international human rights organizations. Thousands have been arrested and sent to unknown destinations. Hundreds blinded by pellet guns. Kashmiri youth are being eliminated. There are countless instances of women being subjected to gang rape by occupation forces. Kashmiri lands are being confiscated and given to settlers. Despite international appeals, the communication blackout in Kashmir, imposed to conceal horrific accounts of barbarity, has not been lifted. The Indian judiciary is either complicit or unable to hear cases of heinous crimes against Kashmiris, including extrajudicial killings and large-scale disappearances. The coronavirus runs among Kashmiri towns and villages and is viewed by the occupation authorities as an accomplice in their genocidal policies. India's barbaric conduct in Kashmir is a blot on the conscience of mankind. It is antithetical to all values and norms of civilized world. The international community seems powerless to stop such willful trampling of the fundamental human rights of the Kashmiri people. Imagine if the entire population of New York State were to be confined to their homes by foreign troops for over a year. Imagine if homes were violated with impunity by the occupiers, land forcibly expropriated, and alien settlers brought in to change demography. Imagine a situation where spoils of colonial occupation become a prize for political jingoism and fanning of ultra-nationalist hysteria. Imagine demonizing of humans, of whole communities to objectify and legitimize their extermination, all in the name of national glory and to win votes in the supposedly largest democracy of the world. Complete and irrevocable alienation of the Kashmiris from India is being demonstrated by their non-violent, indeed stoic resistance to occupation. Kashmiris have been steadfast in their belief that injustice cannot endure and their aspirations for freedom cannot be quelled by force. The Kashmiri cauldron could trigger explosions, destroy the peace of the region, rip apart the fabric of political geography, and spark wider conflagrations of a global magnitude. America must exert its moral authority and considerable influence to extinguish the fires now burning in Kashmir. In a nutshell, the tragic saga of Kashmir is about captivity, of a people being crushed under the yoke of foreign occupation and alien domination. Their resistance should instinctively touch a responsive chord among all those who believe in freedom and justice. We appeal that justice be held for the Kashmiris, that their cries for help be listened to. We appeal to the people all over the world, and in particular in the United States, to do whatever they can, wherever they are, even sparing a moment and a silent prayer would help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now move on to the next speaker.
May I now introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ijaz Haider, a very distinguished journalist and writer interested in defense and security issues. He's currently executive director at Indus News. He was a Ford Scholar at the program in Arms Control, Disarmament, and International Security at the University of Illinois, and a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Let me first thank the Pakistan Consulate in New York, especially Consul General Ms. Aisha Ali, also Mr. Chima, for inviting me and obviously also facilitating this. I am speaking here as an independent analyst and also as an Azad Kashmiri, a fact that I'm very proud of. I'm going to talk about the narrative. And I think I have a few points that I want to present in relation to why I think the narrative is so important. Now, firstly, Kashmir's struggle does not date back to 14th August 1947. That was the moment of rupture, but it goes back much earlier. So I'm not going to go back further into history when Kashmiris sought to resist various armies invading the area. But I will definitely refer to 13th July 1931. We observed the Kashmir Martyrs' Day on 13th July. On both sides was the artificial line of control, as also the Kashmiri diaspora everywhere in the world. And this was the day when 22 Kashmiri protesters were martyred by the Dogra security forces outside Srinagar jail. This was not a communal uprising. It was a Kashmiri uprising. And in his work, Inside Kashmir, which was published in 1941, Kashmiri scholar, writer, and politician Premnath Bazaz wrote, and I quote, "The driving force behind the mass agitation till the 13th July was the discontent among the rank and file of the Muslims. The attack on the jail was in no way directed against the Hindus, and those who laid down their lives at the jail gate did so fighting against an unsympathetic government. It was a fight of the tyrannized against their tyrants, of the oppressed against their oppressors." Please note that these facts are important to set the narrative right. Second, in continuation of the first point, three important events occurred before the so-called instrument of accession signed by Hari Singh on 26 October 1947. The first was the Poonch uprising. Then there was the Jammu massacre. And then the liberation of large areas from the Dogra rule and the formation of the Azad Jammu and Kashmir government. As Christopher Snedden, who's an Australian writer, notes in his book, and I quote, "The people of Jammu and Kashmir therefore began the Kashmir dispute and not outsiders, as India claims, a claim in which Pakistan has surprisingly acquiesced," unquote. My third point, which is a corollary of the second point, these three developments were and remain highly significant because they clearly indicated then, and they still indicate today, that Hari Singh had lost effective control of areas of state and did not have the authority to make any decision about the future of the state and the peoples living in it. My fourth point flows from the third point. Hari Singh had no locus standi to sign the so-called dubious instrument of accession. I don't have to stress this point enough, both in terms of its legal significance and its importance for setting the narrative right. My fifth point is that narrative is important not just to state facts, but also as a legal instrument it becomes part of what international law describes as state practice, and which can, given the wider acceptance of the practice, create opinio juris, i.e. a subjective acceptance of the practice as law by the international community. My sixth point is that it should be clear from the points above that the Kashmir dispute is not about real estate between India and Pakistan, which is one of the positions India has always taken and which we have woefully failed to address up until now. It is about India's denial to Kashmiris of their right to self-determination, which is an inalienable right. The seventh point is that Pakistan will do the Kashmir cause much good by allowing Kashmiris to form a political movement to front this dispute. I shan't say any more on this, but I'm certain that my Pakistani colleagues would get the hint about what I mean. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer, an anti-Nazi dissident, once said, if you board the wrong train, there is no use running along the corridor in the other direction. So we have to board the right train now. My eighth point is it should be clear to the world that India's illegal annexation of IOJK is not and cannot be an internal administrative arrangement. A disputed occupied territory cannot be annexed. The move violates the UNSC, UNCIP resolutions, as well as bilateral arrangements between India and Pakistan. This, incidentally, is also China's considered position, and it was presented on 6th August, immediately after the 5th August illegal decision. And this was presented by the spokesperson of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and this was in relation to the boundary question with India, i.e. Eastern Ladakh. My ninth point is that India has also cleverly crafted the narrative and termed Kashmiri's freedom struggle as quote unquote terrorism. It is a matter of grave concern to me personally that Pakistan has on a number of occasions fallen for this categorization. Let me state for the record that language is crucial. Every term used has a connotation. Terrorism is one such word. It is supposed to evoke a response, a negative one for anyone who's branded a terrorist. But its placement in the language is more than that. It is about setting a context and wielding power. The United Nations General Assembly Resolution A/Resolution/37/43 of 3rd December 1982 states, 1. Calls upon all states to implement fully and faithfully the resolutions of the United Nations regarding the exercise of the right to self-determination and independence by peoples under colonial and foreign domination, and reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. The corollary of this is that Kashmiris are perfectly within their right under international law to wage armed struggle against Indian occupation forces. There should be absolutely no doubt about that. Not only that, under another UNGA resolution, they are also free to call upon external support to wage such a struggle. External actors might not be in a position to support the Kashmiris in their armed struggle, but that is no reason to be on the defensive regarding that option. Language in this sense is not what the playwright Harold Pinter described as a highly ambiguous business. It is a highly strategic business. In his play, Translations, Irish playwright Brian Friel dramatized with great poignancy the power dynamics between the colonist and the colonized. One of the most enduring and ruinous ways in which the colonists can exercise power over the colonized, and not just through weapons, but by controlling the language they speak, by giving meaning to certain terms. I'll stop there. There are many other points one can make with reference to illegal actions taken by the Indian government. Some of those points have been brought up sharply by Ambassador Salman Bashir. Annexation, change of domicile laws, changing the demography, and rescinding the requirement, this was very recently done, by Indian occupation forces to grab land without any no objection certificate. And I'm sure other esteemed colleagues in the panel will talk about that. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Mr. Muzammil Ayub Thakur, is a prominent Kashmiri leader and active Kashmiri rights activist. Mr. Thakur is director of the Justice Foundation, Kashmir Institute of International Affairs, and president of World Kashmir Freedom Movement. He remains engaged with governmental and non-governmental organizations, think tanks, and universities in the UK and internationally to further the Kashmir cause. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for hosting me and allowing me to express some of my thoughts, particularly after this one-year anniversary. Now, if you go back a little bit, hours before the clock struck midnight on the 5th of August 2019, the Kashmiri diaspora were flooded with goodbye messages from friends and relatives who sensed something ominous was about to happen to them, courtesy of the Indian government. And then more than 14 weeks of silence occurred, and Kashmir was cut off from the world. But most importantly, people like me were cut off from our loved ones. The world knew what India had done, yet those India had done it to had no idea due to the blanket ban on media and communications. While the world talks of 5G, space exploration, self-driving cars, advancements and innovations, India yet again threw Kashmir back to the Stone Ages. And as we sit here, we do not know the full extent of what has happened in the last 12 months in Indian-occupied Kashmir. With the additional Indian military forces sent to Kashmir, the total number of armed forces and military personnel now stands close to 1 million. Further making Kashmir the densest military to civilian ratio in the world. It's also worth noting that India sent thousands of buses full of Indian migrants to Kashmir, as well as armed forces in civilian clothing, including intelligence operatives. Now, there are around 10 million people living in a curfew. Public assembly was prohibited under Section 144 of the CRPC. Last year, with limited information coming out, some reports said more than 30,000 Kashmiris were preemptively arrested, with many transferred to jails outside Kashmir because cells were overflowing with detainees. And in fact, as reported by The Telegraph on the 25th of September 2019, 13,000 minors were also subjected to abductions, and there is even evidence of children being kidnapped in the middle of the night and women molested. That evidence I have myself, which I've already uploaded on social media, let alone the pro-freedom leaders who have been resisting Indian occupation for decades. Even the mainstream pro-Indian politicians, what we call puppets, or as Ejaz fondly calls them as quislings, were also detained. Media banned, mobile communication banned, and then downgraded from 4G to 2G. Most landlines banned, schools shut, businesses closed, causing $5 billion lost to economy, according to the KCCI. Now, all the former states' industries suffered severe blows, pushing the majority into loan defaults or even closure. Hundreds of thousands lost their jobs and underwent salary deferment or cuts. Food, water, and medicine were running out. Free movement restricted to the extent a young woman gave birth to a stillborn child because she was prevented from reaching the hospital. Funeral processions banned, death certificates banned. There were reports of people burying their loved ones in the backyard. The injured, mostly by pellets, but including bullets, were arrested. And if they went to hospital, they were found there as well by the army and taken to jail. Now, schools have been closed, universities have suffered, education has suffered, healthcare has suffered, roadblocks and curfews have made the lifestyle of people suffer, and also there has been the suffering of the regional media as well. Now, Kashmiris living abroad found out months later of family events. One young man learned that his fiancée died 4 months after it happened. A son who had not seen or spoken to his mother in months was by chance watching an Indian news channel where he saw a glimpse of her. And then there were the digital deaths, where WhatsApp numbers were suddenly deactivated because of inactivity, and leaving friends and family fearful that maybe it represented something more insidious. And that was just the first few months after India illegally and unilaterally annexed occupied Kashmir, turning it from a de facto occupation to a de jure occupation. By unilaterally abrogating the articles, India have desecrated their own constitution, which clearly states no changes can be made to Kashmir without consultation and approval from the Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly. India have broken their own promises, past promises of holding a plebiscite in Kashmir, and have been changing the nature of Kashmir for years. Abrogating Article 370 and 35A in the way that they have reflects the blatant disregard India has for the United Nations resolutions and international laws. But most importantly, it also demonstrates the openly sinister politics of Narendra Modi, the BJP, and the RSS. Now, India have used varied tactics on Kashmiris to force, coerce, and intimidate the people to accept slavery. And on the 5th of August 2019, India used a bulldozer to try and crush Kashmiris once and for all. It's now plain and obvious that the people do not matter to India. The territory matters for their settler colonial project to force demographic change. Maybe for military and strategic positioning, maybe for innumerable types of minerals and natural resources Kashmir has, or maybe for the hydroelectric potential. But one reason a senior BJP leader declared was to marry fair-skinned Kashmiri girls, as if our women are commodities. When we talk about last year, we must recognize the atrocities committed on the people of Kashmir, even since partition, and realize that the subjugated are not responsible for their condition, and therefore should not be held responsible for their reaction. Not their actions, but their reactions. The population of Indian-occupied Kashmir live in an open-air prison with their backs to the walls and under draconian laws. And for more than 70 years, Kashmiris have faced persecution and suffered unimaginable war crimes, crimes against humanity, such as the hundreds of thousands orphaned, tens of thousands raped and gang raped, thousands of mass graves, draconian laws, enforced disappearances, widows and half-widows, human shields, torture, killings, pellets. The list is endless. And all this while Kashmir was enjoying special status of Article 370 and 35A that was benevolently granted by India, who also gave us the draconian laws such as the Public Safety Act and Armed Forces Special Powers Act, two very special laws for us. The PSA puts anyone in jail for 2 years without trial, and the AFSPA gives impunity to Indian armed forces. And more recently, we have seen the UAPA law used against journalists, such as Asif Sultan, who has been in jail for 2 years and has a baby daughter who is 2.5 years old. She barely recognizes her own father. We've also have the cases of Masrad Zahra, Pirzada Ashik, Gauhar Gilani, Fahad Shah, and just before Eid, Ghazi Shibli, who had already spent 9 months in jail for breaking the news of India's plans to abrogate Article 370 and 35A, who has been lodged again in jail just before Eid. Just a few days ago, a report was published that India have already issued 400,000 domicile certificates to non-Kashmiris so they may permanently reside in Kashmir. The demographic change, ethnic cleansing, and settler colonial project is in full swing. So much so that it took Israel 50 years to do what India have done in less than a month. Furthermore, India have identified strategic areas for development by the army, suggesting further expansion of the military presence in Kashmir. And with that military comes even more human rights violations. But the term human rights violations does no justice to what the people of Kashmir have gone through. And before I conclude, I want to mention just a few examples. The British newspaper, The Guardian, reported on the 22nd of September 2010, 5-year-old Samir Rah, who had a stick shoved down his throat, broke his teeth, and the army, the military Indian occupational forces, played football with his head before killing him by stamping his throat. The Quint on the 13th of March 2018 reported 5-year-old Nasir, who had a pin needle struck into his eye, through his eyeball, and then sand poured into it. Or the Channel 4 documentary from 2012 of Kalandar, whose legs were amputated and tortured, and he was made to eat his own flesh. Or the New York Times on the 15th of September 2019, where abductees, the people that were abducted, were tortured in the mosques with the loudspeakers turned on to instill fear and terror in the population. And that was in my hometown. The Polis Project on the 15th of November 2018 published excerpts of testimonies from the victims of rape and gang rape in Gununpushpura in 1991, where one case springs to mind of Tamanna, who was 9 months pregnant and gang raped and then gave birth to a son with a broken arm 3 days later. There are millions of cases like these, and even worse, every Kashmiri has suffered, every single one. India have time and again broken international law and the Geneva Convention. And in fact, Genocide Watch issued an alert on Kashmir on the 15th of August 2019. Remember that in October-November 1947, nearly 250,000 Kashmiris were massacred and tens of thousands forced to migrate, as reported by a London newspaper. This is not me making this up. after the death and destruction in and of Kashmir, and the denial for people to exercise their democratic rights, nobody has the right to tell Kashmiris that they should accept their occupier as their savior. It would be akin to telling the Americans and Indians when they were under the British rule to accept their condition. When the Holocaust happened, the world said never again. When the Rwandan genocide happened, the world said never again. When the people of Srebrenica were ethnically cleansed, the world said never again. The days of colonialism, imperialism, and fascism should be over. And I hope the world community intervenes to stop the further annihilation of Kashmir and Kashmiris at the hands of the radical India under the terrorism of Modi, the BJP, and the RSS. I thank you very much.
May I now request Mr. Todd Shea, who is CEO and founder of Comprehensive Disaster Response Services, which is a non-profit charitable organization engaged in disaster relief and development work in Pakistan since 2005. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me on this wonderful program with so many distinguished guests, many of whom are friends and people I dearly respect. I am just an American regular guy. And I think that what I can bring to any discussion such as this is that fact that I'm just this regular American guy who ended up coming to Kashmir in the 2005 earthquake with a group of Pakistani American doctors from APNA, which Dr. Asif Rahman, our guest, is a distinguished member of, and Islamic Medical Association of North America, and other wonderful people responding to the 2005 earthquake. When I came, I didn't even know I'd landed in a helicopter in Kashmir. I thought I'm still in Pakistan. I didn't know until a couple weeks later when I had some discussions with some of the doctors that we were in Kashmir. And I think that the problem with your everyday ordinary Americans like me, the problem has been that in the media in America, the powers that be, the government, and the people that own the media companies, they present the Kashmir issue as Indian Kashmiri separatists or terrorists. Before I came to Kashmir and started learning directly from Kashmiris, from Pakistanis, and even from Indians, before I took interest in this issue because I was there and learning about it from people that would be my employees who have been now with me for 15 years, and I've seen their suffering. They have relatives on the other side of the line of control that they can't see. Their parents came over from occupied Kashmir and settled in Azad Kashmir. So my own employees who've been with me last 15 years have told me the stories of heartbreak. I've heard them, I've seen the tears, I've heard the stories directly. And unfortunately, American citizens and Westerners don't hear these stories for the most part. In the last 15 years, it's come out a little bit more, but still not very much. And before I came for the earthquake, like I said, I'd only heard the Kashmiri issue framed within this idea of terrorism. I knew nothing and was taught nothing, and the media said nothing about the real reasons behind all of these terrible things that have happened, and what happened after World War II and at the birth of India and Pakistan, and what happened with the with Kashmir being unjustly ceded over to India by India. So I think that what this problem is in terms of being able to pressurize India is that the American people need to be educated. And since our government and the Western media is got some agenda that is not interested in teaching Americans in general and the population of the world in general about the true face of India and what is really going on, I think that it's incumbent upon people like me and people like you to speak out directly to the American citizenry through Facebook, through videos, through individual conversations, as many as possible. There needs to be an army of people put together that can, through pamphlets and through talks at universities and through meeting with people one-to-one and sending messages, to try to educate people on what is really going on in Kashmir, that it isn't an issue of just jihadi terrorists, as India likes to portray to the world. It isn't an issue of separatists who want to, who are part of India and want to break away from India. Kashmir was never really a part of India. It was a princely state, and unfortunately, Americans don't know this. So this is unfortunately an injustice that America has failed to do anything about. I was very disappointed in Barack Obama. Barack Obama spoke about the Kashmiri issue as a candidate a few times, but once he became president, I never heard him utter the words Kashmir ever again. And I'm very disappointed in Barack Obama that he could have and should have done something. The American media, the American corporations who own the media and the government, they seem to all be in cahoots for the status quo to remain the same because of India's economic treasure, the economic influence and the markets of India that our businesses here in America are drooling over. So America and many other governments have looked the other way. But unfortunately, America states that it is for freedom and human rights for all, for liberty and justice for all mankind. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We have these documents like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, that is not only supposed to govern the country of the United States of America, but also be a beacon of freedom and hope for people oppressed all around the world. And yet we have been hypocrites, and we have been absolutely fazul to the people who are suffering in Kashmir, when their plight and the injustices they've suffered are exactly what America on paper talks about doing something about to help, doing something about to end that kind of tyranny. Yet, as hypocrites do, we have said one thing and we have done another, and it's all about money and power. We have forgotten the Kashmiri people, and we have sold our corporations and our media and our government have sold a narrative that India has portrayed without giving the Kashmiri people a voice. And they have successfully, unfortunately, been able to manipulate the American citizenry to believe that Kashmiris and the Kashmiri issue is one of jihadi terrorism, like Al-Qaeda and Taliban and all these. They've mixed all that together so that Americans in general, unsophisticated, everyday Americans like me, to not know the truth. Now, I came because of the earthquake, but I learned over the years about Kashmir and about its problems, and that's why I've spoken out on many occasions for the Kashmiri people and at various forums around the United States and around Pakistan about this issue. But I'm just one person, and I'm a regular, everyday American, and everyday Americans like me, millions and millions and tens and hundreds of millions of us, just like me, that didn't get a chance to go to Kashmir and learn, and didn't get a chance to be in Pakistan and understand this. Now, they need to understand so that they can put political pressure on their leaders and companies to do something about this issue, because India isn't going to budge unless the governments of the West force them to, through economic embargoes and pressurizations. And the only other alternative is for Pakistan and China to go to war with India and to take this bully and show, because there's only one way to deal with a bully, and that's by force. So it's either economic force or it's military force that's going to change India's tune. They have destroyed their own constitution in order to do this terrible thing in Kashmir that they did a year ago. They have destroyed the fabric of their own society in many ways. India its true face has been shown by this action, but they still sell themselves to the rest of the world. And even people in the rest of the world, the leaders know that India is doing this, but because of the money, because of the power, because of the markets, because of the lucrative money that is to be made, they stay silent about this issue. So it is a very unfortunate circumstance that has happened here. And I just hope that we can start thinking out of the box and start educating the citizenry of these countries like United States, Britain, Europe, and around the world. Start educating the citizens, it's the citizenry, because the governments and the media have not done their job. They have totally, as hypocrites, have totally forgotten what their journalistic and their foundational principles have shown them and taught them about what is America about, what is journalism about. Instead, we have fooled our own people, the American people, and not given them the information that they require in order to understand. So we have to circumnavigate them. We have to do things to think out of the box to get to the population, the masses, so that there can possibly be change through economic pressure, embargoes, and governmental pressure. If that does not happen, then the only way I see forward, if we can't do that, then there has to be a military solution to take this bully India, with the only language that they understand is force and violence. And we have to take that violence and force to New Delhi and to Mumbai. And that is unfortunately the only thing, if we inflict enough of a damage, enough of a price, that maybe India would change its tune. And I'm not an expert at Kashmir, but everything that I've seen and learned from my staff and everything I've learned over the years has been that this is really the only way forward. And, you know, to be honest with you, I swear to you that when I first came to Kashmir and learned about Kashmir, I was actually more on the Indian side. I bought into the narrative that I'd heard before from the US media, CNN and Fox News and whatnot. So if anything, I was more biased towards India. But when I learned from the Kashmiris themselves and read the history myself and talked to people and researched and talked to journalists and authors, I came to my own conclusion that ever since the end of World War II, Great Britain, US, they have allowed India to get away with this. The UN has been fazul. We've looked to the UN. They've come up with these resolutions, but they have no teeth in them. So without teeth in them, India has just gone and done everything that it's wanted to do, step by step, year by year, until finally it pulled this horrible travesty of injustice against the Kashmiri people. So I appeal to the governments of Pakistan and Turkey and other allies to do everything they can to pressurize the rest of the world and make them understand that the only other solution, if we can't get the world on board to do what's right in Kashmir, then there has to be a war. It has to be a very, very devastating blow exacted upon India to get them to release their draconian grip on Kashmir, stop the rape of women, the blinding of children, the disappearance and mass graves, the ethnic cleansing and the atrocities, the Holocaust of what is going on in Kashmir. Only that will stop it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Asif Rahman, a very prominent cardiologist, philanthropist, and Kashmiri rights activist. He serves as chairman of Apna Board of Trustees and chair of Kashmir Humanitarian Task Force 2020. Dr. Sir? Please unmute your phone, Dr.
Assalamu alaikum. Let me start again. Thank you, Naim Chima Saab, Consulate New York, Aisha Ali Saab, and Ambassador Asad Saab. Eid Mubarak to everyone. I hope that all of you are safe in coronavirus pandemic and your loved ones, and please follow the strict guidelines so everyone should be safe during this crisis of pandemic. It's very difficult to be a last speaker, particularly when you are following such a streamed speakers and they have highlighted very important issues about Kashmir. I do agree that struggle of Kashmir didn't start in 1947. It started way before 13 July 1931, when 22 Kashmiris gave their life to just complete one azan in front of Central Jail on Jummah Day. This struggle continued even after the birth of India and Pakistan. And then India was the country who went to United Nations to resolve issue between India and Pakistan about Kashmir in 1948. Our people continue to struggle, but in last 10 to 15 years, this struggle intensified. And I think the numbers which I will give, probably these are the numbers I came to know, but everyone is following different statistics and they might have a better numbers. But I think in last 10 to 15 years, more than 150,000 Kashmiris were killed and more than 8,000 of the Kashmiris were disappeared. Over a period of last 10 years, slowly there was a build-up of troop in occupied Kashmir. And now it's close to 1 million military and paramilitary personnel are in Kashmir. And basically now even international humanity is saying that what is happening in Kashmir is a genocide. In addition to killing and mass graves, there is a disappearance of over 8,000 young people, extrajudiciary killing, detention, using pellet guns, rape, and all these things were used to basically dishearten Kashmiri that they will stop what they are doing, but our struggle did not stop. I think the darkest day in the Southeast Asia history was on August 5th last year, when India basically all of a sudden decided that the status of the Kashmir, which was a privilege for Kashmiris until that issue is resolved, were abrogated of 370 and 35A. And since then, the torture, the killing, and the kidnapping, and particularly the kids and vulnerable and lockdown, no internet access. Just imagine that that country is in complete siege and lockdown for over 365 days. There is no internet. And I, being a physician, that I know that there is a significant issues with healthcare. People who are sick, they are having a heart attack, they can't go to the hospital. People who had chronic renal failure and they were on dialysis, they cannot get to the dialysis. Pregnant ladies cannot go to the hospital. There is no school, there is no internet. People don't know what is happening. And still from January, I can give you these numbers. Since January of this year, 229 deaths, including 3 women and 3 or 4 underage kids were killed just this year. And then when whole world was fighting coronavirus, April 1st, they came up and they changed the domicile law of the Kashmir. Now, if anyone who has been working, living, coming in and out of the Kashmir in last 15 years, they can apply for Kashmir domicile. And that is a way that they want to change the demography of the Kashmir. And this is a page taken from a book, what was happening in Middle East. But at least Israel did very slowly. I'm not saying they did right, but they did very slowly. But this Modi, he's into a rush. I don't know what the rush is, but he's into a rush that in last few months now, they are completely trying to change the demography. And what I think the goal is that try to convert this Muslim majority into a Muslim minority. So then if there is a time comes when there is a referendum, then at least they can have their way of results from this. I think we living in this country and belonging from either occupied Kashmir or Azad Kashmir, where I belong from, I think it is that we should do everything what we can to lobby in the Congress, we lobby in the Congress and try to educate people. And I think if you can see that from last 1 year, lawmakers in United States are now more educated about Kashmir. And we have been convincing them that if they want a peace in Southeast Asia, if they want a peace between 2 atomic nations, that peace goes through United Nations and it goes through Kashmir. And there is no resolution of this Kashmir issue unless the Kashmiri people will be given the right of self-determination, have a referendum, and let them decide what is good for their future. I think a lot of things have been said very eloquently, but from this meeting, I will request that all of us should request United Nations, United States of America, and everyone who we meet, that India should immediately demilitarize Jammu and Kashmir. They should reinstate Jammu and Kashmir previous status as soon as possible. Stop demographic changes and stop migrating people from different parts of the India to Jammu and Kashmir. Stop forced disappearance in incarceration and communication blockade immediately. And stop economic exploitation and extraction of resources from Kashmir, and let human rights watch groups, human rights organizations, give them access, give media access to Jammu and Kashmir, so they should have a fact-finding mission what is happening in Kashmir. And ultimately the solution which will resolve this issue will be going back to United Nations resolution, let Kashmiris decide for their right of self-determination, and that will create and bring a peace in that region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we've had a very thought-provoking and very important discussion today. And the different aspects and the different facets of the situation that have been, hinted at and talked about, from the legal to the humanitarian to foreign policy and strategic, I think it has been very, very educative and informative for all. From the Consulate, we will continue our efforts to highlight the depth of this situation, the seriousness of this problem, and to educate people as much as we can. To be able to talk about this issue within the limit of 1 hour, I think it's quite impossible to do so. But I'm very grateful to everyone for their comments, for their remarks. I think we all stand more educated on this issue today. And to wrap up, I will now request Ambassador Asad Majid sir to kindly make a few concluding remarks. And over to you, sir. Thank you. Unmute, sir.
Thank you very much, Aisha, and I must thank all the very distinguished panelists who joined from various stations to contribute to this very important discussion. Clearly, each one of the speakers have brought a value added, I must say, to the conversation, and Ambassador Salman Bashir clearly highlighted the importance of promoting awareness and also to appeal not just to the international community, but to the kind-hearted people of United States. I think awareness promotion is something that is very, very important. And when Ambassador Salman Bashir described the situation in Kashmir as akin to genocide, I think that is a fact that is not well recognized, particularly in the United States. Of course, Ijaz Haider spoke about the importance of narrative. I think at the end of the day, frankly, it is all about narrative. And this webinar also is actually designed to present our perspective. And obviously, all of you looked at the Kashmir situation and the Kashmir dispute itself from your own set of experiences. But there is also that underlying consistent thread that runs through all your presentations. Similarly, Mr. Ayub Thakur, I think he inventorized the situation and state of Kashmiris after August 5, 2019. and the kind of oppression and repression unleashed by India in Kashmir. And clearly India is using the COVID cover to basically increase its repression in Kashmir. Todd gave us the ordinary American's perspective. And I think he also emphasized the importance of educating people. I do want to reaffirm Pakistan's commitment to seeking a peaceful resolution of this dispute. We will continue to extend political, diplomatic, and moral support to the cause of Kashmir. Our commitment is consistent. It is ambiguous and firm and continued. And this is something that we will continue to do. Dr. Asif Rahman clearly, overviewed from his perch, the history and kind of endorsed some of the presentations made earlier. And I think lobbying Congress, and we thank you, Dr. Saab, and Apna and our other members of our community here in the United States for having lobbied extensively with your representatives both in the House as well as in the Senate. And that has actually resulted. I think United States is the only country, while we lament the lack of attention, but it is also a fact at the same time that the only perhaps elected body in the world that convened 2 consecutive hearings on human rights situation in Kashmir is in United States. So it was the Lantos Commission, which is the focal point for human rights issues in the US House of Representatives. It held a specific hearing on Kashmir, and then the subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee also convened a special hearing on the human rights situation in Asia, and it focused specifically on Kashmir. And there are, more than I think 70 or 80 statements, letters, tweets issued by congressmen over this period in support of and raising their voice and concern about the situation in Kashmir. Before I conclude, and I know we have gone past the deadline, Aisha, but it pains my heart to be speaking about Kashmir a year after what we saw happen in Kashmir on August 5, 2019. What is really significant is that most of our fears and warnings to the international community have proven to be right. We were telling them that what India is doing in Kashmir is motivated by BJP's Hindu supremacist agenda. It is basically not just about Kashmir, it's about the treatment of minorities and Muslims. That the real target of their moves is to basically shift the demographics of Kashmir, that they are using, and this is something that Todd also mentioned, that they are using the bogey of terrorism to divert attention and also to gain domestic mileage, And in hindsight, we know that they have done every single one of those things. And then really, I think what is most troubling is the fact, and I think if there was any doubt in anyone's mind on what real fascism and Hindu supremacist ideology is, the fact that they chose to celebrate the destruction of Babri Mosque and the inauguration of the Ram Mandir on the same day, it's really like poking you in your eyes. And if there is any doubt, It's not just about Muslims, I think. It's about minorities in India. And then that's what should basically open everyone's eyes. And as Ambassador Salman Bashir said, you know, Kashmir is a flashpoint, Kashmir is a hotspot, and Kashmir is a threat to peace, security, and stability in South Asia, enduring peace, security, and stability. And I think Dr. Asif Rahman put it very well. And that's a important catchy phrase, that peace in South Asia goes through Kashmir. And that really is what, you know, it is like. We will never have long-term sustainable peace in South Asia until the Kashmiris are denied their right of self-determination. And I think Dr. Asif Rahman laid out very well in terms of what India needs to do to bring back normalcy in Kashmir. Pakistan on its part, and Prime Minister has repeatedly reaffirmed our commitment to dialogue, our commitment to seeking resolution of all disputes through dialogue. And we have urged India to basically create enabling environment for that. And for that, there are a certain number of steps that India needs to do. And some of them were already outlined by Dr. Asif. So I thank, sir, to you and everybody, all the panelists, for joining us. This is part of our awareness campaign. We'll be doing more to promote awareness here. So thank you, Aisha, for organizing this. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, once again. And just a last note, as part of our awareness campaign, as you were just saying, this has been watched by over 2,000 people. So technology, as you said in the beginning, has its, you know, it provides us opportunities now to carry our voice to a large audience. Thank you once again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
इंसानों का हक तस्लीम भी करते हो, और कश्मीर में जुल्म सितम करते हैं जो, उनके लिए कोई हद सितम नहीं रखते हो। अब चाहे हमारे घर न रहे या जिस्म पे अपने सर न रहे, हम फिर भी कहेंगे आजादी आजादी, हम लेके रहेंगे आजादी। दुनिया के मुंसिफों, है दुनिया के मुंसिफों। माँ के सामने तड़प तड़प कर बेटा मरा, भाई के सामने तार तार बहनों की रिदा। माँ के सामने तड़प तड़प कर बेटा मरा, भाई के सामने तार तार बहनों की रिदा। खून में कर पत्ता पत्ता बूटा बूटा, अब कश्मीर का